There's more than one way to skin a cat, and also more than one way to write a novel. Today, we're going to talk about 4 different methods to write a novel. I would need 3 more cats to do the other thing. There are several different ways that authors go about writing the first draft of a novel. All of these methods get you to the same place, just in different ways. Let me know in the comments what, if any, of these methods you use, or if there's a method that I missed. Also remember that these types exist on a spectrum, and around the edges of that spectrum, things get a little wishy-washy. Alright, type number 1, the crystallizer. I am genuinely curious if anyone actually fully uses the crystallization method to write a novel. Crystallizers start with a short summary of their entire story. The most extreme example involves starting with a single sentence. You would then take that sentence, expand it out to 2 sentences, then a paragraph, then like maybe a page summary, and then you keep expanding it out until you have a fully fleshed out first draft of a novel. Buddy gets convicted of a crime, escapes from an island prison, finds a bunch of treasure, then gets revenge on the people who wronged him. That's a crystallization starting point for the Count of Monte Cristo. That sentence would then be expanded out, as I said, until you get to the full-length novel. The crystallizer is distinct from someone who outlines because of this sort of outward expansion of the story, and also because they're writing prose the whole time, even if at the beginning it's highly summarized. I don't know if anyone actually uses this method. I have to imagine that writing an entire novel like this would be very difficult. It would get cumbersome really quickly. But if you have an interesting premise, this might be a useful way to ideate on it and expand it out. For instance, in the Count of Monte Cristo example, there are several questions in that sentence that we could expand on, and expanding on those questions would likely create more questions. If you suffer from writer's block, or if you have trouble getting enough depth out of your premises, then crystallizing might help, as it always gives you a place to start from and expand to. Next up, the pantser. I should have undone the belt. The pantser is the screw it, I'm just going to write my novel type of writer. They start with an idea or premise and just start writing and see where it goes, where the plot and the characters take them. This type is also referred to as the discovery writer, since they discover their story as they're writing it. I've also seen the term gardener used because they plant a seed and then see what grows from it. You can approach pantsing in different ways. For instance, some folks start with just a single idea and see where the story goes. Others may work towards an ending that they've imagined. The defining feature of the pantser is that you don't work from an outline and generally don't do any sort of formal planning before sitting down to draft your novel. You're writing by the seat of your pants, hence the name. Stephen King is probably the most famous proponent of pantsing. He references a lot how writing from an outline will zap your story of its emotional oomph and drain all the fun out of the writing process. I think that's true for some people. Other writers, though, will find it difficult to complete a novel without having at least an idea of where it's going, and a lot of people do like to write from an outline. I can think of a few potential issues with pantsing. It can sometimes cause you to write yourself into a corner since you don't know where the story is going. You can have trouble bringing it together at the conclusion in a way that's satisfying. Of course, writing your way out of these problems can often result in some interesting stories. I think the type of story you're writing also matters to a degree. Shorter, one-off novels are probably easier to pants than something like a 15-book epic fantasy series. Next up, the weaver. I'm miming weaving on a loom because I don't have a loom. I also don't know what using a loom looks like, so this might just be nothing. The main defining characteristic of the weaver is that they write their story out of order. They come up with some interesting ideas for different scenes and situations to put their characters into. They write those scenes, and then after a certain point, once they have a bunch of separate scenes written, they try to weave those together into a story, either by adjusting scenes so that they make sense in chronological order or filling in the gaps with other scenes. The weaver is distinct from the pantser because the pantser writes their story in a linear fashion, while the weaver jumps around all over the place. Now, all writers are weavers to a certain point. It's very normal during revision to change the order of scenes or change when events occur for intensity reasons. That's normal and it's probably going to happen. Weavers take this to the extreme though, because they will often write scenes with no idea where they fit in the story and maybe without even knowing what the ending of the story is going to be. This method brings with it a few problems that I can see. First, you're inevitably going to create a bunch of rework in order to get all of these disparate scenes to fit together. Continuity is the biggest problem that leaps to mind for me. Like, if a character dyes their hair in what ends up being chapter 6, then in every subsequent chapter you need to update to reflect that they are blonde instead of brunette now. Also, writing a bunch of exciting scenes up front could potentially leave you with a bunch of less exciting scenes to write in order to piece the story together. It's like eating all the red and green Skittles first, and then you're just left with all the not good colors. All that being said, I think weaving would work really well for like an episodic novel where the overall status of the narrative doesn't necessarily change much throughout the work. Also, a lot of writers do free writing sessions when they start a new project where they write scenes to explore the setting or characters, and these scenes may or may not be in the proper order, or they might not end up in the actual manuscript. This process can end up looking a little bit like weaving. And the last type we're talking about, the outliner. Ah yes, the outliners, the kind of writers who show up on vacation with agendas and checklists. Outliners, also called plotters or architects, construct a working summary of their story before they begin writing. This might include a scene list, character sheets, world building information. The exact amount of information and format of an outline will vary from writer to writer. Some people use spreadsheets, other people use flowcharts, some people construct beautiful mind walls with post-it notes and different colored strings and stuff. The main distinction from the other types being that an outliner creates some sort of document which they then follow when creating their first draft. The most obvious advantage of outlining is that you can figure things out before you actually sit down to draft your story. You'll know when to foreshadow or when to establish that a character is afraid of worms because you know in chapter 6 they fall into a worm pit. There are some problems that you may encounter with outlining, the main one being that some people hate the process. In that case, follow Mr. King's advice. It also, in my experience, can be a little bit difficult to tell if something is going to work while you're outlining. So there's always a possibility of having to rework your outline as you move through your draft. Sometimes it's just hard to tell if something is going to work until you actually write out the scene on the page. So there you have it. If I missed a novel writing method that you yourself use, let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.